Et salut tout le monde, aujourd'hui on reçoit Ethan. How are you, mate?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Very good. I'm very happy to have you. We like a lot of information about chain abstraction, and I think Particle is a very nice a bit introduce yourself, what you were doing before Particle, and what bring you to build Particle.
Yeah, absolutely. But before Particle, I got into Web3 originally, maybe at this point 5 years ago, 4 years ago. I got into crypto when I was 15, actually. And I started building some applications in the space. I was attracted by, at that time, Dogecoin had gone from some very low price to, I think it was approaching $1. And so that, I was 15. I was like, okay, this is an interesting, opportunity for me. And so I bought some and I got hooked on, starting to buy crypto. And then I ended up developing some things in the space. And then when I was 16, I ended up actually deciding to get a job in Web3. So I started working in developer relations, basically as soon as I could legally work in the US. And I joined a company called ChainStack, and I did, RPC provider stuff. So I wrote documentation and helped developers onboard. I was there for about, I think, a year and a half. I eventually led developer relations over there. And then, as I turned 17 and started, deciding to align my career a little bit more, I joined Particle Network. I've been here for, I guess, almost 2 years, a little bit over a year and a half, something like that. And so I've been at Particle doing developer relations initially. Now I do a lot of things on the operations and the marketing side. The reason I joined Particle was mostly because I actually had no intention of leaving the first company that I joined. I never really wanted to leave, but I got a message on LinkedIn one day from a recruiter, and they pitched me on this idea that Particle Network was kind of building this like user experience technology where you could log in with Google, like one click. And I was like, okay, sounds kind of interesting. I'll bite, I'll have a call with them. And, I actually ended up having a call with the CEO, and the day after I flew out to San Francisco. I live in Denver, and so it's a 2.5 hour flight. I flew out to San Francisco and I met him in person, and he basically told me about this idea of account abstraction, social logins, and kind of being able to create a user experience that mimics Web 2, but all on chain. I really like this. I thought this was a really cool idea, and I was very captured by that idea. And so I decided to join. And since then, over the past few years, we've been just laser focused on like exactly that, which is how do you improve the user experience? How do you basically make Web3 feel like Web 2, but retain those core benefits of being on chain, of being self-custodial? And so most recently we started working on chain abstraction and kind of, fixing that user experience problem in the field of multi-chain fragmentation, which has led us to where we're at today, which has been, a crazy journey over the past few years working on chain abstraction.
If you had to explain what is Particle to someone very basically, like someone that just enters the crypto world, how can you explain that?
Yeah, Particle is a like Particle Network as a brand is more developer facing. And so typically the way that I describe it, to people that ask me, is I say that, we solve user experience problems. So we make it such that it's easier to use crypto, it's easier to get into Web3, and it's easier to transact on chain. And so that is the basis of what we do. We make it easier to use on-chain applications, to use Web3. Now, the way that presents itself, of course, is pretty complicated, but people ask me all the time, they say, so what do you actually do in crypto? Like, what do you guys do? And, these are people that aren't in the space. And so that's what I tell them. I say, yeah, we solve user experience problems. We make it such that anybody can use Web3. You don't have to be some advanced trader or a developer. You can use it, as if you were to use a typical application that you're familiar with. And that is essentially the result of all the technology that we work on.
All right. And yeah, what would be the North Star at the end? Because I think you built for a lot of years and now it's coming out. What would be the North Star for the next years?
Yeah, really the vision that we have. So to take a step back, we started in the realm of user experience, we started focusing a lot on social logins, right? So how do you get a user into Web3 as fast as possible in a way that's familiar to them? So, onboarding with Google or email or things like this. And that was really successful. And you've seen a lot of companies that have popped up since then, like Privy and, a Dynamic, that have been very successful at this. That problem was solved. And so then last year or the year prior in 2023, we focused a lot on account abstraction, right? So, okay, we've solved the onboarding problem. Now, how do you make using Web3 more flexible? How do you, gasless transactions and session keys and these things? And so we did that, and we were also quite successful at that. And so then in 2024, we wanted to sort of align this with the next major problem that we could kind of consolidate our technology around. So what is the biggest problem facing Web3 at the moment? Well, in my opinion, and what we identified originally was it's the fragmentation between chains. So there's a few things happening in Web3, which is that number one, more chains are launching almost every day. So like we had this evolution over the past 5 years where we went from like having a small group of chains to having it's like almost 1,000 chains now, which is insane. And so like this is just a nightmare for user experience, because what it means is that as a user, if I'm using 10 applications and each of those applications are on a different chain, which is kind of the direction that we're going in, now I'm managing 10 different balances, 10 different accounts, sometimes even multiple different wallets. And so in the direction that the space is moving, and even the way that it exists today, requiring users to manage their balance on every chain and to use multiple different wallets and to worry about gas tokens on each of these chains is not sustainable. It worked fine back when it was Ethereum, Bitcoin, Ripple, and a few other small chains, but it doesn't work today because we're just so rapidly expanding in the number of chains. It's so easy to launch a chain. And so what really our North Star and what we think is going to be the future, and this is a somewhat controversial take, not everybody agrees with this, but I think this is like, I believe this is really the direction that we're going in, which is that every application from here on out is going to be what you can consider chain agnostic. So a user that goes to an application, any wallet that they use, they deposit or they on-ramp into that application with any token on any chain. Doesn't matter what chain that token is on, as long as it's a recognized chain that people trust, then they can onboard with that token. They can spend that token there. That application can be built on any chain. Doesn't matter where that application exists, whatever chain that they want, and the user can access it and use it from assets that they have anywhere. And so basically it makes Web3 feel like it's all one chain. Like the user experience of Solana is like, okay, I have my balance on Solana. I go on, I use applications on Solana. It's very straightforward. But if you could apply that same user experience to every application on every chain, then now you have an ecosystem that feels like one chain, but it's a distributed network of different blockchains. And so this is what you need to really take Web3 to the point where we can scale without like compromising user experience, and users can actually use applications without needing to worry about this third condition, which is the chain. And so what I think is going to happen, what I hope is going to happen, is that within the next 2 years, every application is going to be agnostic. You can use it. You don't have to know what chain it's on. You can basically completely forget about where is this app built, where do I have assets. You just have your assets collectively and you use the app. And I think that's really what we want to enable.
Yeah, I totally agree. The fragmentation is the biggest problem right now. I had, Hyperline 2 weeks ago, and they have the same vision. It's not the same project, of course, but it's the same vision. But they have a product that is permissionless. Do you think Particle does it, and could it be?
You mean is Particle permissionless?
Yeah, for chains to just connect.
Yeah, this is a great question. So this is something that I think is really important. At the moment, Particle Network and our kind of chain abstraction stack is permissioned. And so the way that it exists today is that if we want to deploy, or if there's more chains that we want to plug into the stack, as a team, Particle Network needs to deploy it on that chain. But this isn't sustainable, because right now it's okay because there's still not that many chains. I mean, there's like a number of big chains that we need to integrate, but there's not like thousands that we need to constantly support. But what I think is going to be really important, and what I admire Hyperlane for their like permissionless first approach, because this is really important. They've identified the trend that we're going in correctly, which is that if we launch more chains, you can't rely on some team to deploy on these different chains. You have to be able to do this yourself as a protocol. And so I think that they've identified a problem and they've solved it. And so I think we're probably going to go the same route, where hopefully this year we're going to make it such that to deploy chain abstraction, which specifically we build something called universal accounts, to deploy universal accounts, anybody can do it. So if I launch an app chain on Caldera, for example, and I want to deploy universal accounts, I can do that myself, and I don't need to go to like Particle Network to have that be deployed. And so Hyperlane has crushed it in that realm. And so we want to hopefully replicate that with chain abstraction, because if you have 2,000 chains, we could never support that many chains. We could never support 2,000 chains ourselves. It's too much, overhead for one team. And so allowing those chains to instead, fix that problem themselves and deploy universal accounts, I think that's the only way that we can scale. And so we will be permissionless soon, hopefully. But for now, it's permission.
How many chains do you got? And do you have the major one?
Yeah, right now we have, I think it's 13 EVM chains and Solana. And so it's difficult. So chain abstraction, I think this is going to be the hardest thing to do initially, is that chain abstraction is very easy to do like within EVM chains, like within the EVM ecosystem, because every EVM chain is relatively the same in terms of like deployment and infrastructure. The challenge actually is, how do you chain abstract like Base and Arbitrum and Solana? Like, how do you make these feel equivalent? Because these are totally different virtual machines, execution environments, wallets, addresses. So this is a challenge. And so we started with Solana as the kind of like the alt VM that we supported, and it works really well right now. The next thing that we're going to do is move based chains. And so we're thinking like movement and Aptos and a few of these chains we're going to go next. That should be pretty straightforward. I think not too big of a challenge, but there's also this growing trend of we're like expanding more alt VMs. And that's tough because kind of going back to your previous question of like permissionless deployment, you can't like, if we don't support move based, like move VM, you can't deploy universal accounts there permissionlessly, because we first need to support that. And so that's going to be a challenge. But right now we're going to add more EVM chains. 13 EVM chains right now is pretty good, because that's kind of where most of the liquidity is. We've actually seen, interestingly, that like 90% of our transactions are actually liquidity moving from EVM chains to Solana, because Solana has so much trading and so much like, activity right now, that most of our activity is the movement of EVM chains to Solana. And so I think that's like, we're hitting most of the market at the moment, but we will, we're hoping to support basically every VM chain that exists, and then eventually move based chains. We'll have Cosmos based chains as well, I think, and then maybe even Bitcoin natively eventually. But these are very difficult technical challenges that we'll kind of approach step by step. But for now, I think Solana and those EVM chains has been cutting like the majority of user needs for now.
Okay. Yeah, because if we can go a bit in technical details, how Particle works, I think it's intense and solvers. Can you explain a bit, quite simply, but still a bit technical?
Yeah, so it's a very common mechanism actually. And so people sometimes think that chain abstraction is more complicated than it is, when it's actually decently simple. And so, like, first of all, the core technology that we developed to enable this experience of like a unified balance is something called universal accounts. So a universal account is just a smart account. It's a it's an account abstraction, an ERC 437 smart account that you can use, that you deposit into, and that you use to transact. Now, you can deposit into that smart account from any chain and transact on any chain. So how that works is, like, let's say I deposit, 1 ETH on Base and 1 ETH on Arbitrum, and I want to go buy an NFT on Avalanche. So how does that typically work? Okay, well, normally what I have to do is I need to go and bridge that ETH from the two chains that I had it on, and then buy the NFT on Avalanche. So I have to do that all manually. Instead, what we can do is we can say, okay, the user has 2 ETH on these other chains to buy the NFT, and so we use as you mentioned, an intent-based system, a solver that will basically say, listen, I have funds on Avalanche. I have 2 ETH on Avalanche that I can pay for this NFT with. And so if you just pay me 2 ETH on, for example, Base and Arbitrum, and then I will pay for that transaction on Avalanche. And so this is commonly known as liquidity fronting. And so there's a solver or a filler that has liquidity on the destination chain that you want. It's just accepting repayment from the chains that you have funds on. And so it's an agreement where it's saying, I have assets on Base, I want to do a transaction on Arbitrum. This solver has assets on Arbitrum, so just pay for my transaction on Arbitrum, and I'll pay you back on Base plus a small fee. And so this is exactly how a cross works, or how Relay works, or how any of these intent-based bridges work. The difference is that we are incorporating those transactions that you would typically go through a cross, for example, to do. We're introducing those natively into whatever transaction that you're doing. So I want to go buy an NFT on an Avalanche. You don't need to go and bridge to do that. You just buy it, because we are introducing that bridging automatically with that transaction that you're doing. And so it means that regardless of where you have your assets, if it's on Base or Arbitrum or whatever, what you can spend is equivalent to what you have collectively across all of your accounts, across all chains. And so if I have 1 ETH on 5 different chains, and I have 5 ETH total that I can go and spend. And that just all boils down to, there's a filler somewhere, there's a solver somewhere that will pay for my transaction on the chain that I want, that I don't have funds on, and it'll accept payment from the chains that I do have funds on to then go ahead and fill that transaction. And so it's a very simple mechanism, and it works really well, because it means that it's not like a traditional like mint and burn bridge or anything. So it allows you to actually basically have cross-chain transactions that can happen almost near instantly. It's like, 5 seconds or less typically to do this, even if it's from multiple different chains. And so it creates a really nice user experience. The challenge is that you have to maintain a lot of liquidity because those failures need enough liquidity to actually front those transactions. And so it's intensive on that side. It requires a lot of overhead, a lot of capital. But if you can get it working, it works really well. And so that's all universal accounts are. They're just smart accounts that you deposit funds on any chain. And then whenever you want to spend funds on a chain that you don't have assets on natively, we will pay for it. And then you repay that solver, repay us with assets that you do have on other chains. So that's kind of the TLDR.
Okay. I think I read that one of the main problem is that you don't want a solver to be too big because it's so much. He's so fast and he's so performant that he does everything. Do you think about this and how can you stop that?
Yeah, so solver centralization is a decently large problem. It depends on how you look at it. So a centralized solver system is a point of centralization in an ecosystem. And so if a solver wants to charge a lot of fees because it's the only solver that will get execution, or if the solver fails or just stops working for some whatever reason or decides to pull its liquidity, then that's a big problem for the ecosystem. Right now in our current system, actually Particle is the only solver because we're still relatively early. And so it works well, but Particle is the only solver in our current network. And so we actually currently have the centralized solver problem. So the question is then, how do you move from a single solver that maintains 100% of the order flow into kind of a distributed solver system? So there's a lot of approaches to this. There's all these different like competitive solver systems and auction-based systems and these different things. And so we're going to probably adopt some standard systems such that there's a kind of like a fair auction that solvers can use. I think it's a big part of it is proper incentives. And so if it's profitable to run one, then you can bootstrap that and allow you to have ideally, you want a good chunk of solvers just that you aren't subject to one or two that could be points of failure for the execution of transactions. And so right now, the way that we currently have it is we do have a centralized solver system. It is just Particle, but super temporary. I think at some point, ideally in like the next month even, we want to make it such that anybody can run a solver, and we're expecting that a large number of people will run solvers because it'll like there's some solvers, they take on risk of like reorgs or things of this nature, so they could potentially lose capital. But we think that the profitability of running a solver, hopefully within our system as well, will exceed the potential capital risk, and thus we'll have a pretty solid ecosystem of solvers that they make enough profit to keep them running. And that's kind of the goal that you have with these type of systems.
Okay, so yeah, you have to have an economic security, so we can trust them to do what we want. Is this going to be on PARTI, your token?
To some degree, yeah. So PARTI is essentially, it plays a few different roles. The first thing is that the most important part that PARTI plays is actually less about getting more solver infrastructure, but more about incentivizing liquidity. And so PARTI, essentially what it does is liquidity providers, people that want to provide liquidity to the ecosystem, which is very important because the amount of liquidity that is available is the ceiling to which you can do a transaction. And so if there's only $20 of liquidity in the system, then you can't do any cross-chain transaction worth more than $20 because that's the limitation of what can be fronted. And so you want as much liquidity as possible across as many chains as possible, such that you have constant access to these cross-chain transactions. And so we're going to use PARTI as an incentive mechanism to basically have liquidity providers provide liquidity denominated in PARTI. And by providing that liquidity, they'll earn fees and kind of earn yield on that liquidity, on that PARTI token, and they'll earn that back in that same token. The other thing that we do is, of course, like it gets a little bit in the weeds, but the way that we actually coordinate cross-chain transactions and settle cross-chain transactions is through our own chain. We don't advertise it that much anymore because it is sometimes confusing for people, but we actually have a Particle chain that is used purely as an infrastructure, purely as a coordination mechanism. You don't connect to it. You don't have a wallet on it. It's just like it's kind of like a Celestia almost, like it's an invisible backend infrastructure. And so we have a validator set that will essentially validate and settle cross-chain transactions. And it's a huge part of what makes this very efficient. That chain will also have staking of PARTI tokens. And so the core thing of PARTI is that it powers the coordination of these cross-chain transactions through that chain, through staking to validators. And it also incentivizes liquidity providers to provide liquidity and earn yield on their tokens that they're providing. And so these are going to be the two main things. we have some other things like governance and whatnot, but Party is going to be a very important part of making this decentralized, of making it efficient. Right now, it's all just being ran by us, and we're the ones providing liquidity. We're the ones running the validator, which is not sustainable. And so Party will allow us to incentivize everybody else, external third parties, to run validators, to provide liquidity, and that will actually allow us to be a truly decentralized solution. Right now, it's not. And so that's kind of the path that we're going in. Party is not launched yet or anything like this. That's why right now it's still all centralized. But one next step that we have, hopefully decently soon, we'll see in terms of timeline. But the next major step will be decentralization through the means of that token to incentivize those kind of third-party actors.
Okay, all right. And if you can come back to Universal X, what about the V2 and what is it actually?
Yeah, so Particle Network is an infrastructure provider. So we build universal accounts, and universal accounts are meant to be things that developers use to build chain agnostic applications, to build applications that you can onboard users with assets from anywhere. And so as a basis, Particle Network is just a provider of this chain abstraction infrastructure. But what we realized last year is that chain abstraction is not, it's a hard thing to sell because it's so new and it's a very different user experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of came to this conclusion where I was like, well, how do we sell chain abstraction? How do we get developers to build with this? Well, really, we're going to have to build something ourselves and prove it to people. So we have to prove to people that this is an important type of innovation for user experience. So at first we built a small demo application, and it got really good feedback. And so we're like, okay, well, let's expand on that a little bit. We can go a little bit deeper, add some more functionality, some swap functionality into this application that we built with that infrastructure. More attention, more people are interested in it. And so then we decided in basically November of last year, we said, well, why don't we just build a full app with our infrastructure to show people why this is important and to potentially even be a source of revenue for us? Because clearly the feedback that we've gotten on these demos is great. So we should just build something with what we've built here. And that should not only prove to developers that this is important, but this should also maybe even be revenue for us, like as an application. And so we launched back in December, early December, Universal X. And so Universal X is essentially a trading platform that we built. We built it all ourselves, that uses universal accounts to basically allow you to trade, buy and sell any token on any chain, those 13 EVM chains or Solana, in one click. The user experience is wild. It's like, I'm convinced there's nothing like it on chain. It is a crazy, it basically feels like you're using Coinbase, but it's all on chain and it's not custodial. And so it's a really cool experience because you can deposit on 5 different EVM chains and then use those funds to go buy a token on Solana in one click, and you don't need to pay gas fees on Solana or think about having Sol or ETH or anything, whatever. It's it's wild. So that was our sort of first proof of chain abstraction. It was our way of saying to the ecosystem, this is not a narrative. This is a real technology that has real implications. And so Universal X was that first proof for us. In December, it was still a very basic application. It was, as I mentioned, you buy a token, you can just select, it's kind of like Uniswap, right? You select a token that you want, you buy it. It's pretty cool. But it wasn't really suitable for day-to-day usage by users because it was so simple and it was still kind of like a demo application. And so what we actually launched this week, just a few days ago, was what we called Universal X V2, which was our final realization that we have something real here. We have PMF, and we're going to double down on this application. And while providing this infrastructure, we're going to actually build out an app that is going to generate revenue. It's going to attract real users. And so we launched Universal X V2 as basically a complete overhaul of that initial demo application that we launched, such that it is now full centralized exchange interface, zero latency charts, token information, aggregation of all this token discovery, token listing pages. I mean, it's everything you could ever want out of a trading platform, but it's completely chain abstracted. It is, you can log in with your Google account, on ramp or deposit from any chain, buy any token with one click. It's a crazy user experience. And so we launched that earlier this week as kind of our way to actually ship real usable application on chain that people could experience chain abstraction through. And so far, it has been a revenue driver for us. It's been received fantastically. There's been a huge amount of volume and users that have started using it. And so it's only further validated to us, this is a massive untapped market. chain abstracted applications are something that nobody's built yet. And we were the first ones to build it. Universal X is the first like really chain abstracted application that's been live. And so far, the potential for growth in that sector is massive. And so we've been very excited about this. And I think so far with V2, the response has been amazing. So we're pumped.
Okay. And if I'm not wrong, we have to use your wallet, right? Can we use the same seed phrase, or we have to create another one?
So you can use the wallet that you're already familiar with, like your MetaMask or Phantom. We don't make you create a new seed phrase, but you're using a smart account. And so the core thing with this is that while your MetaMask is being used, for example, the address that you're spending the address that you're spending from, or that like the address that you hold tokens on is a little bit different. So it's a smart account. It's owned by your MetaMask. So your MetaMask is the seed phrase that secures it, but it's like actually a contract on chain that you're spending tokens from. So whenever you go and use Universal X, you actually, even if you connect with MetaMask, you have to deposit into a new account. That new account is not custodial, or it's not like a seed phrase owned by us or something. It's just a contract. It's a smart contract on chain that is owned by your MetaMask. And so the reason that we do this is this enables us to have this kind of nice user experience, because without getting too deep into it, MetaMask uses something called EOAs, externally owned accounts. Those accounts are very, very strict on what you can and can't do. And so when you have a user instead transact through a smart contract, you can do a lot more, and it's much, much more flexible. And so that's what we do. You connect with your MetaMask, for example, or you can log in with your Google account if you want. You deposit into the smart contract, and then you can start trading. And so we aren't having a user use a new wallet necessarily. They can still use their MetaMask, but they do have to deposit into a new account. Now, we've recognized that this is not the best user experience. Like if you could just connect your MetaMask and use your funds without having to deposit anywhere, that would be great. And so there is, and this is a very interesting kind of like, it's a little bit technical, but there's an upgrade within the Ethereum ecosystem coming soon called the Pectra upgrade. The Pectra upgrade is going to introduce a proposal that's going to go live on Ethereum called EIP 7702. EIP 7702, without getting too deep into the weeds, basically lets you use your MetaMask account like a smart account, like a smart contract wallet. And so that will allow us to, once that goes live, I think in March, that'll make it such that you can connect to Universal X with your MetaMask and spend the funds that you already have on your MetaMask in Universal X. So you don't need to deposit into a new account. You can use the account that you already have. And so that's going to be the next big step, because we're just waiting for basically Ethereum to upgrade to make that possible. But that's kind of how it works in the moment. And that's how it's going to work very soon.
Yeah, I was asking because Pectra is going to change everything, as you said. Can you do it already with Solana or Sui?
So Solana's tricky. We'll see how it'll work with Solana, because Solana actually we have a similar setup. So with Solana, whenever you're using a universal account on Solana, it actually isn't the same thing as like your Phantom EOA, or it's not an EOA, because on Solana, technically everything is a contract, but you have specific account contracts or account programs on Solana. But what you transact through on Universal X, for example, is actually a custom program that we built on Solana. And so it's similar in that you need to still deposit into that account because it's a different program. So if you want to use your like Solana account natively, that probably won't be possible for now, but you could use your EVM account natively and use those funds on Solana. But you couldn't use your Solana account and use the funds that you already have on Solana on Universal X, at least for now. That might change one day, but I doubt it, just because the way that Solana works is not compatible with the same way that Ethereum will work with 7702. And so for now, it's just going to be basically, connect your MetaMask, use your funds there. You can use those funds that you have on your MetaMask on Solana if you want to, but you can't use the funds that you have on Solana on Universal X without bridging or without depositing. So that's how it's going to work. Maybe with Move or Move-based chains like Aptos, that would be a little bit different. It might be possible to use the accounts natively there, but it's just tricky because most of these chains, their native account structures are not flexible enough for us. And so we need to have custom implementations, and that usually requires a different account address. Now, Ethereum is great because 7702 will fix that, but there's not that same type of infrastructure on these other chains yet. And so that's kind of how we're positioning it. But I think 7702 with Pectra will be a huge boost to user experience, because then you basically, if you're using an EVM account, you won't need to deposit. And so that's going to be the biggest change. I think that will, everybody's asking us for this. And so I'm just waiting for it to go live, and we're going to be pretty excited about it.
Okay, awesome. And I have a friend that use it like every day, Universal X, I mean Particle, and he said me there is still some consequent fees. Do you think it's a problem, and do you think you can solve this?
Yeah. So, after having Universal X live now for about 2 months, everybody tells us the user experience is fantastic. It's not that, it's super unique. There's nothing like this on chain. It's just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love to hear this because it's like, this is a validation. But the one point of feedback that we get every day is the gas fees are too high. The gas fees are too high. And so this is actually, I think it was a problem from our side because so Particle and Universal X, not Particle, but specifically Universal X is competing with Photon or GMGN, if you're familiar with these platforms on Solana. So these are like very high frequency
Mhm.
trading platforms on Solana. Photon is I think the biggest one. You also have like Avara and a few other, I think even Moonshot. So there's like these major trading platforms in Solana. And these guys charge 1% fees on all of their transactions. And so if you trade on Photon, they are charging you 1% on the total value of your transaction. I think it's the same thing with GMGN. And so that was when we were thinking about, well, how do we generate revenue for Universal X? Well, we're going to use the same model where we're going to just do 1% on every transaction because that's what these other platforms do. But what we didn't realize is that these platforms are actually not that transparent about this fee. Most of these platforms don't tell you that they're charging you 1%. They just deduct that from what you get out of the token swap that you're doing. And they just take that as revenue. And so, but what we did initially is we said, we're like, well, we're just going to tell the user that we're charging them that. And so we told them, hey, you're doing $1,000. We're charging you, $10 for the gas fee. And then, people don't like this because now you're like, wait, I have a $10 gas fee. This is crazy. I'm going to lose $10 in this transaction. Whereas on other platforms, they just wouldn't even tell you. And so I think we set ourselves up for a lot of that pushback because we tell you about those gas fees. So we are going to do some optimizations where we're probably going to reduce that. The actual gas fees that you pay, like the actual on-chain gas fees, are not that high, but we're going to optimize those as well. And we're going to make it such that it's clearer what you're getting charged, and I think it's going to make people more satisfied. We're going to change kind of the way that UI works and that kind of stuff. And so I think the gas fee complaint's not going to be an issue, by the time this time next month, basically. I think it'll be more straightforward. But it is the main point of feedback that we've got, and I think it's mostly because of a design failure on our side, or like we were just too almost too open with the fees, and so we're going to optimize those now that we've had that feedback, and people have expressed that they don't like that 1%. And so we might do some optimizations, but it actually isn't a technical limitation. It's actually just our own charge because that's how we make revenue. And so we can make that zero, and the gas fees would be super low if we wanted. But so we just have to find like the right way that we can make revenue and drive, value through that product.
Okay, totally makes sense now. Okay. And I have a question because this last month we talked a lot about DeFi. DeFi with an I at the end. Do you think that could play a role in Universal X? Because for the UX?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, when the DeFi AI narrative first started, I was very skeptical. I posted a tweet about it on Twitter. I was like, what's the point of AI agents beyond just like shitposting on Twitter and having a token? I was like, I don't understand this whole narrative. But I've used some products and I see the vision of like DeFi AI, which is that you use a prompt and you tell an AI what you want to do, and it'll do it for you. And so this is a cool idea because it's easier than doing it manually. I still don't think that like prompting is going to be the main way that you use DeFi. I think this is a little bit far stretched. I would personally rather use a nice UI than use a prompt interface. I don't know if that's just me. I just don't. I'm like, if I don't need to use a prompt interface, I don't want to. But I get that vision, and so chain abstraction and even Universal X is really important for like this type of interaction, for like prompt based, DeFi AI powered interaction. Because typically, what you need to say is, I talk to an LLM and I say, I want to bridge 20 USDC from Arbitrum over to Base and then buy a token on Base. So you still need to tell it to do these to bridge, and there's still these operations involved. Whereas if it was a chain abstracted agent or a chain abstracted protocol, then you just say, I want to buy this token on base, or you don't even say it on base. You just say, I want to buy this token, period. Like that's it. And then it'll do those operations through a universal account to make that transaction possible and to do all those bridging operations for you. And so like the same thing that you can do within like Universal X, which is that you just click on a token and you buy it, can be applied to a DeFi like agent, which is that you just tell it what you want to do. I want to buy this token with this much USDC. Now that USDC could be on 5 different chains, but you don't tell it that because a DeFi like AI agent is abstracted. And so it might not even know this. It just says, okay, fine. And it routes it through universal accounts and it gets executed. And so that is the way that we're thinking about it. We might have some native integrations with Universal X plus like an agent in the future. We thought about this as well, where like you can use an AI agent to interact with Universal X through the same way. So we might, we have this on kind of on our like tentative internal roadmap. And so I think it's a promising vertical. I think that it's a little bit overhyped in a lot of cases, but there will be some real use cases that come out of like the AI sector that I think will be really strong. And I think chain abstraction should hopefully be a pretty significant part of that.
All right. I got the question. I don't know why I didn't thought about it, but with intent, I think you can make like approve just one transaction, right? Because we talk a lot about intent for cross-chain, but can you do this?
Yeah, definitely. Like there's a big trend of AI agents building intents, because the challenge is building an intent that does what you need it to, right? So it's like one transaction that can like do some dynamic, like I have this number of USDC. I want to have this amount of yield within these conditions over this period of time. If I don't meet this yield, then do X and Y. So you can get really complicated with an intent. Now you could go to a front end and define this yourself, or have some algorithm define it, or you can ask an LLM and say, hey, I just want to earn the best yield on my USDC. So how do I do that? And so then the LLM goes and defines an intent that contains all of these conditions and all of these steps and all of these complexities. Then it executes that intent. And now I'm earning the best yield because of some complex intent that was written by an AI agent. So you can almost think of it as like, I think agents will be good for translation from very simple ideas and natural language into complex intents, which then achieve a goal that you have. So I have a simple goal, I want to do X and I want to do Y. An AI agent says, okay, here's the intent that you need to do that. It constructs it and then it gets executed. And so I think this will be an important trend. I think chain abstraction fits very well into this whole paradigm as well. Of course, chain abstraction is more narrow and just solving the cross-chain problem, but intents more broadly are a really interesting sector that I think tie very, very well into AI.
And you have your own intent network, or are you using like something like Anoma or another project?
We won't natively support these type of intents. I think our intent network is very basic, and we actually build it ourselves, but our intent network is just purely cross-chain. So it's just, I have X tokens on these X chains. I want to do a transaction on Y chain, get those tokens between these chains, and that's all we do. So it's a very specialized like solver liquidity friendly mechanism, intent mechanism. Now, this will be fully compatible with like Anoma or like more generalized intent systems that go live that are more, they're not for one specific purpose. You can define a very complex, multifaceted intent. Our system and universal accounts will be totally compatible. We won't build that ourselves because it's not super in the scope of chain abstraction, but I think that would be an awesome user experience and, would fit really well with what we're building. And I know the Anoma team very well, and what they're doing is really sick. And so I think we are excited to have chain abstraction tie into that. Like you can imagine just like going to an application, typing in, let's say like even the complicated scenario would be like, let's say I have 5 USDC on 5 different chains. Okay, I have 25 USDC. I want to earn the best yield possible on that 25 USDC. And so I go to an interface, to an LLM or something, and I say, I want to do this. I want to earn the best yield in this USDC. Okay, it translates that into an intent, which uses the chain abstraction protocol, consolidates all this USDC on these 5 different chains, then executes some strategy to earn that yield. That would be crazy, because all the user knows, I have 25 USDC. I want to earn yield, and they type it in. But all these bridging operations, all of this like intent construction, and then the execution gets done for the user by essentially autonomous solvers or agents. And so that is a really cool user experience that I'm excited for. And that should be possible, I think, this year.
Yeah, what I would love to see is I want to send to swap everything that is under $5 or something, because I have so much token. Like, you just have $1 or just half a dollar, and just annoying. So if that's possible, that would be really amazing.
Yeah, it should be. I think that would be a good
And
use case. Like swap all
yeah.
my dust to one token and one transaction. That'd be cool.
Oh, please. Oh, yeah. And what's your roadmap for Particle for 2025?
Yeah, I wish I had like a strong roadmap that I could share. We are always hesitant like giving dates, but I think that in the first half of this year, our 100% focus is how do we scale Universal X? How do we bring more users into chain abstraction? How do we get people to use it? We are growing our volume and our user counts. Like we're hitting all-time highs very frequently. It's just like it's going really well so far. And so we want to scale Universal X. In February and March, we're going to be launching our SDKs, which is going to mean we're going to have like, I think over 100 integrations within the first month that we have already lined up. So
Nice.
what I want and our goal is like, basically by like, Q3 this year, we're going to have great traction on Universal X that we are already starting to see. And we're going to have, over 100 strong integrations of universal accounts, like applications that you can go and use that are, totally chain agnostic through that infrastructure. And so our goal is that, we want to be a strong infrastructure provider with a strong ecosystem of applications, and we want Universal X to be successful. And so our roadmap right now is that we have a lot of like updates and optimizations that we're preparing for Universal X. And we're also focusing a lot on distribution and developer engagements for universal accounts and for that infrastructure. And so, right now the next steps is going to be growing that, getting that really, just crazy distributed. Like, I think we have a killer product here and infrastructure that makes a lot of sense, has real PMF. And so we have just some insane plans, and then that'll lead into TGE. I wish I could give a time frame when that'll happen. I'm not allowed to, though. I'll get in trouble. And so, that'll be whenever we're ready for it, that'll happen. And so, we'll do that, and that'll kick off the full decentralization of the network. We'll onboard a ton of infrastructure partners, and I think it's going to be awesome. So I'm very confident in what we're building, and I think the next kind of 2 quarters are going to be killer.
Awesome. Just have 2 more questions. First, is there a subject I didn't mention you want to talk about?
I think we covered a lot of things. I think overall, chain abstraction as a narrative has grown a lot over 2024, and you might have heard a lot about it throughout that year. I think we've made a distinct transition this year where chain abstraction has moved from pure concept and kind of like a narrative, like a hype narrative, and into products that are being built. And so Particle Network is not the only one that's building in chain abstraction. Like we are not the like sole, bringers of chain abstraction to the ecosystem. There's a lot of guys. Like if you're interested in chain abstraction, I recommend looking at Socket, One Balance, Octo. There's Omni, Arcana. There's a lot of great protocols that are building and solving the exact same problem that we're trying to solve from different angles. And so this is a growing vertical, and it's not just us that have identified this problem. Chain abstraction is going to be, in my opinion, one of the most important sectors that we see in terms of user experience over the next few years. And so the one thing I would mention is just go look into the other protocols as well. Go kind of see the content around chain abstraction. There's a lot of it. It is a fascinating vertical, and we're very happy to be a part of it.
And what you think? For now, there is not so much people talking about it. It's not like a big narrative, but it's so important. What do you think could bring chain abstraction in the center of attention?
Yeah, I almost think that chain abstraction doesn't need to be the center of attention. I think that if chain abstraction is truly successful, nobody will know about it. So this is the core, because the whole thing with chain abstraction, it is the removal of information. It's the removal of complexity. And so if it's really successful, then users aren't going to know that they're using a chain abstracted application. They're just using an application. And so the success of chain abstraction will actually be the death of the narrative, because if the narrative is still around, if people are still talking about chain abstraction, then clearly it's still too visible. And so people are still, it's still too in your face. And so chain abstraction's real success would be when it is not visible at all and nobody knows what chain abstraction is, but they feel the effects of it. And so I'm almost of the opinion that I don't see like more mindshare for chain abstraction as a big goal. I think that the goal should be that actually it's less mind share because it just becomes the norm across the ecosystem and people become used to it. And it's just kind of like, it's just the expectation. And so I think that we probably will see some pump, like I'm sure around RTGE and some other tokens, people will get more excited about chain abstraction. There'll be a bigger idea because, there's incentives and speculation. But I think in the long term, what I hope is that chain abstraction dies as a narrative. This is a good thing actually, and actually means that we were successful in what we want to do.
Okay, I love it. Just one question for you, not for Particle. Usually I ask that an advice, for a young investor or just someone that want to learn about crypto. And you're young, but you made your way. So what will be your advice?
Yeah, I mean, I got very lucky. I'm 19. I just turned 19 a few months ago. I've been working in crypto now for over 4 years, and so I kind of grew up in the space a little bit. I got, I just right place, right time. But the one thing that I give as advice to everybody, especially if you're younger getting in the space, is that crypto right now, there's very few industries where you're around for a period of time that you can see your own quantifiable impact and that can potentially have massive material benefits, but also just like it changes every single day. And so like, I think there's really only 2 industries in the world right now that you can get into and that you can really dedicate like 100% of your time and see the results of it. And it's beneficial. And I think that's probably going to be crypto and AI. And so if you choose crypto as a vertical that you want to get into, then if you're going to do it, then do it. And so like I've been, like 80, 100 hours a week for the past 4 years. And I don't regret it at all, because if you really want to like go somewhere in Web3, you have to dedicate 100% to it. And this is the time to do it. If you're passionate about it and if you really want to do it, then there's no better time than to like go 100% in and just dedicate as much time as you can to building something. To like, if you have an idea, then just build it and like spend all your time growing it and trying to make that idea come to life. And so, for me, and the way that I got here was really just a combination of like, I like crypto and I saw there was an opportunity. And so I got into it and I kind of took advantage of that opportunity and I just never stopped. And so like a big part of like being successful in crypto is just like being relentless and just like not stopping, like just like every single day, as much as you can, as much time as you can put in, no off days. And this is what creates success in crypto. And this is the time to do it. I think for most other industries, I would say, don't do that. You're wasting your time, you're wasting your energy. But in crypto, especially during this time period, there's no excuse. Like there's so much opportunity. And I think especially for younger people, like some of the most successful people in the space right now are actually younger than me. Like, I don't know if you know, M Team from Spire Labs. This guy's, he's 17 or he's 16 or something. It's crazy. And so like this guy's actually, he's doing way better than I am. So like, there's so much opportunity that if you just like, and this guy, he grinds, like he's on Twitter 24/7. So like if you put in the time and you're passionate enough, or you're motivated enough, then, I mean, it's wild what you can do. And so I think it's the biggest piece of advice is just like put in time. Don't expect to get results quickly. I've been doing this for 4 years and I've still have not seen that many results, but it's just it's a matter of enjoying it and kind of enjoying the time you're doing it. So I think there's just huge opportunity right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, that was a perfect advice. Thanks a lot, Ifan, to come. And I hope you get the best launch, TGE. And maybe you will come back later if you have anything to add, or we can talk a bit more about chain abstraction. And thanks to bring that, because we really need to solve fragmentation. It's a big problem.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me. This is great. Really good questions. And maybe we'll do a follow-up one here by the end of this year. And I'm sure there's going to be some big changes.
Awesome. See you, man. Bye.
All right. I appreciate it. I'll see you later.